And thank you so much for taking the time to chat on the show today. I just feel like you are such a mentor to me, and I appreciate you so much. How are you?
I'm good. I'm always happy to talk to you. You always put a smile on my face, so I'm glad to be talking to you here.
All right. Well, I appreciate it. I noticed that you were smiling as I was in our green room, um, pouring my heart out to you about some stuff earlier. So I'm glad that I'm able to do that. But why don't we dive in? Because I know a lot of folks are thinking about a lot of different topics today, and I wanted to dive into some of the biggest learnings that you kind of took away from transitioning from a CMO to your CEO role, and then kind of your experience having an exit as a CEO.
Right. Whew. That's a big topic. um, I think, wow. So I think the biggest thing about transitioning from CMO to CEO is that I didn't have to deal with asshole CEOs anymore. The asshole was me. Um, and so that was an interesting one. I also got a lot more sympathy or empathy for other CEOs when I became one and went, because just a little background, after running marketing teams and the occasional sales team, I transitioned into a CEO in a turnaround opportunity. And so I walked in and it was a disaster. And it's interesting because, like, I've walked into disasters all the time. I'm a startup person. I've taken over, CMO roles when there hasn't been one in the seat for like 3 years. Like, I've done disasters before, but there are moments that I'm just like, okay, everything's a disaster. And instead of being able to focus on my lane, which granted, marketing is a very broad lane, I have to then figure out, oh, wait, are taxes due? Oh, wait, are there regulatory issues that could shut down my company? And that was probably the biggest difference between, like, being a CMO and trusting that somebody else was taking care of, like, the business survival, and having to own the business survival myself.
Interesting, interesting. You hear it all the time, and I've worn the CEO role at some very early stage ventures over the last couple years, before we met, actually.
Mhm.
And so I got a sense for some of the challenges, although these ventures didn't end up working out in the way that yours did. But I will say that I have had conversations quite a bit with CEOs, and they've told me some of kind of the challenges, and it's definitely not an easy thing. If you think about kind of some of the easiest parts of that role being a CEO, maybe we can start off with that. Some of those kind of easiest parts, and then maybe some of the most challenging parts.
As I kind of alluded to at the beginning of my last answer, I was the asshole as opposed to I was reporting to the asshole. And by that I mean, and for me, I'm a very type A personality. I don't like being yanked around. I don't like, I call it shifting sands, like when your boss tells you one thing and then it tells you another thing and then tells you one thing and tells you another thing. Well, there I was managing my own board, doing
Mm.
my own stuff. Um, and the sands weren't shifting. I mean, yes, there's always external factors. We'd lose a deal, or we'd get a surprise deal, or whatever that was, or we'd turn a customer. But it was that I wasn't feeling the whims of someone else. And when I realized that I also needed to protect my team from my own whims.
Hmm.
So then that might transition into the most difficult part, which is I can't just talk anymore. My words have meaning, and people quite honestly overreact to them. I'm not that important. I don't care if I have a CEO title.
I've heard that feedback from CEOs, that you have to really be mindful of so many different things, because anything that comes out of your mouth is taken so seriously. It's like the top
Hmm.
of the organization. And so, the ability to like manage emotions while you're having to then influence an entire organization just really was something that stood out quite a bit. And so I
Mhm.
think one of the pieces of advice that I heard over and over from CEOs out there, and then investors and boards, was that your ability to manage emotions and get a coach and that sort of thing to be able to help with those things was really important, because like as much as you also wanted to share with the rest of the team what you were feeling, to be transparent and open, sometimes you just can't because it's
Right.
somebody responsible.
And you and I are both very emotionally honest people, right? We tend to be hard on the sleeve. I like full disclosure, I'm having a crappy day, whatever it is. What I learned was that it wasn't necessarily that I couldn't have emotions. I think a lot of CEOs do fall into that trap. It's that I needed to be aware of them. I
Mm,
needed to realize that my team was not responsible for my emotions. And that also meant that sometimes I had to say, hey, I'm having a bad day. I might sound a little short, or it might mean that I move a meeting because I wasn't in a mental frame to have the meeting because I just lost a big deal, or
mm,
something like that. And that's not to say you don't learn to recover from those things. That's not to say you don't learn. But when you first take a step into another role, everything feels
mm,
so much. so so as you learn to manage your day to day, as you learn to manage yourself, um like don't be afraid to say, hey, I'm having a crappy day. But
mm.
that doesn't mean that you dump all over somebody about why your day was crappy, because that's going to cause them to freak out that the business is going down and they're going to lose their job, and like that's only going to make things 1,000 times worse for you. So it's a fine line, but it's like, hey, I'm having a crappy day versus why my day's crappy.
That reminds me of a couple stories or experiences that I've had. I remember I was part of a startup many years ago that was started to do well, and the CEO comes to me, and he happened to be, like my best friend. So he's like, "Hey, listen, we're doing well. That's the good news. The bad news is we're going to be out of money in a couple days because the server cost for what
Oh,
we were pushing was too high." And he's like, and a couple of days, I think it was like 30 days or 40 days or something like that.
yeah,
So
but
it
that's
wasn't,
such a miss. Oh my gosh.
yeah. So he didn't
Yeah.
think about it, right? And at the time we had outsourced the servers to, and yeah, I won't name
Yeah.
the service, but in any case, so he's like, I don't know what to do, but and this was his first rodeo as
Mhm.
a CEO at a thing that actually was working. And so he's like, but I'm gonna call a meeting, like we have to like get all hands on board, because like I don't actually know what to do, and if this thing does sink in 30-40 days, I need to give people a heads up, like I can't do this to them. And it was tough on him, right? So he ends up calling an all hands emergency, tells everyone, and we were able to figure it out. So we were able to actually migrate, and we were all looking at each other. Right? Obviously, I'm not technical, as you know,
Mhm.
but the engineering team was just all looking at each other. And these were a lot of like straight out of college
Oh
individuals, right?
gosh.
Yeah, they're like
Yeah.
MIT, brilliant MIT engineers, but they had never done this before, right?
Hmm.
So we were able to figure it out. So that was a situation where he like basically, was super transparent, and it worked out. But there are so many other scenarios, even at that organization. I remember that came up where he made the other decision to not share stuff,
Hmm.
right? And I know a friend of mine had started a company called Postmates, which was that,
Yeah. Yeah.
delivery. And there was a time where he was also about to run out of money, and
Hmm.
they were able to close the deal at the last hour and get it done, and they had a good
Yeah.
outcome, as you know. So it's tough to be a CEO and have to hold this information and not share it with too many people when there are
Hmm.
some very, very difficult choices to
Oh
make.
yeah.
So
I mean, and I never meant to be a founder. It's so funny because there are people like you who are just like, you're a born founder. You're a 0 to 1 guy, right? We've talked about that so many times, and you're one of the best 0 to 1 guys I know. But founding is, I ended up founding this company because I knew I could help people. And that's what it came down to, is I really wanted to help people generate pipeline and revenue, and I wanted to help people without jobs make money while we're helping other companies generate pipeline and revenue. And I'm like, oh crap, I have to found this now. And we're in a rough funding environment. I didn't have a lot of cushion or whatever because I didn't need to found a company. And so there were moments that it's like, wow, can this happen? Like, should I quit? Um, and I was relieved to hear my brain say, nah, you're just having a crappy day or crappy week. And now my product's made a giant step forward. And George, I look forward to showing it to you later this week or next week. Time has no meaning. But it's a rough go.
Yeah.
It really is a rough go. And as I said, for different reasons.
Hmm.
As a CMO, my rough goes were usually externally inflicted upon me. As a CEO, I'm responsible for it.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about Sound GTM,
Mhm.
what you're focusing on in terms of solving, who should use it, and you sort of alluded to a little bit of what inspired you to launch it, but maybe we can unpack that a little bit.
Yeah. So, what inspired me was really helping people. Who should use it? This is really funny because I've come into so many organizations and I'm like, if you focus on everybody, you focus on nobody. And here I am going, well, crap, a lot of people could use this. Okay, who do I focus on? So, fundamentally, we are looking at B2B SaaS companies, usually in MarTech, and we have some legal tech and HR tech because I have to staff out my marketplace for people to send you leads or close your deals or whatnot. Um, and most people are basically saying, hey, I'm willing to pay a certain amount of money, $500, $1,000, depends on your ACV, for somebody to become qualified. So we're the Upwork for B2B pipeline and sales, with one key difference, which is you don't pay by the hour, you pay when something hits success, and you define success in your own CRM. So so we sell into demand gen or to founders or marketers, depending on just how big the company is. Um, and we chose very carefully to do that, not just because guess that's where the pain is, but that's also quite honestly where the money is. And, in a startup, you need to make it easy for people to give you money. So, and likewise, we're telling people to incentivize qualification, like whatever that first qualified stage is, and maybe with a spiff for a close one lead once it's paid. However, like we can incentivize anything up and down the funnel.
Hmm.
And again, it just comes down to kind of ruthless focus. So I kind of went all the way to focus on that one as opposed to actually answering your question. But Sound GTM is like, if you're spending on AdWords, if you're spending on LinkedIn, or if you're even considering stuff like that, you're used to paying for crappy leads. And for us, you don't have to pay until it's qualified.
Awesome. Are there any particular trends that you're seeing out there around go to market motions in B2B SaaS that folks should really consider investing in? One of the ones that you just alluded to, I know your own product, but so maybe we can double click
Yeah.
into that actual as a trend.
I mean, there's no question that fractional and gig is a huge trend. And it's so funny because as AI is coming up, a lot of people in B2B GTM right now are talking about people first and then product led growth because, and it's funny because we don't actually have a PLG motion because we have to learn to, I was planning on it, but demand is too high. So I
Oh, that's
can't support
awesome.
it. So, um, but fundamentally, as people are cutting their go-to-market budgets, they're cutting their sales budgets, they're cutting their marketing budgets. This is why I have people to work one side of my marketplace, right? They're saying, okay, but what about the product? We still have a product. How do we use PLG? So I think right now, market forces and grasping towards efficiency are pushing any go-to-market trends we're seeing. And I think it's also pushing us to, I don't want to say panic, but everyone's like, what about this one? What about this one? What about that one? And that's what I'm kind of seeing happening out there.
Well, let's talk a little bit about product marketing. As you know, like I've been really introduced to the product marketing category from working with you at our previous demo
you
automation.
can you can take the woman out of product marketing, but you can never take product marketing out of the woman, apparently.
Well, I mean, I also had to dive in to understand it in a lot more granular way when we were working on that other product, that startup.
Mhm.
But we've now really embraced it here at Asimeo
I love
because
it.
it's the
Yes.
number one user right now.
Yes.
So I had a question: if you're thinking about hiring product marketers as a CMO, and it seems like product marketing is like more relevant than ever.
Mhm.
And you're like an OG product marketer, right? If you
I
are,
was.
if you're CMO thinking about hiring, how should we approach this, right? Like, what are
Ooh.
the attributes you should look for in a, world-class product marketer?
Product marketing is interesting. I was in product marketing before it was cool or before it was really well defined. I think we've done a much better job of defining kind of where product marketing sits and that it's a very much a translation organization. You know, you take the product and you figure out how to talk about it and you figure out how sales is going to talk about it, right? You sit like in the middle there and you figure that all out. And so when I'm looking at hiring a product marketer, I always feel bad for them because working for a former product marketer cannot be easy. But when I'm looking at it, I'm looking at somebody who can understand people because they have to understand how customers think about the problem you solve. They have to understand how sales talks about the problem you solve. And it's all going to be different and it's all going to be nuanced. So someone who can listen, someone who can then synthesize and is a decent writer. Not that they have to write all their own stuff, but fundamentally you're communicating in product marketing, no matter what you're communicating. And so you need to be able to, maybe you don't have pretty sentences, but you need to be able to get the idea clearly communicated. I don't necessarily look for industry experience because sometimes people can come in with biases and don't like catch up to the fact that your customers are different than they were a month ago or 6 months ago or 6 years ago. Although there are times that you do, if you have a super technical product or you're talking to developers, it's probably a good thing if somebody's done some developer marketing before or at least has been around developers. But aside from specifically like engineering and development, I don't think industry experience is particularly necessary.
Are there any KPIs that
Ugh,
product
this is the
marketers? I
hardest
know
thing.
it's the
It
hardest
is
thing,
like
right?
I'm like, oh my gosh, it used to drive me bonkers because so I've been in product marketing. I was actually a product marketer at Amazon, like more than at AWS more than 10 years ago. And it was like, what does product marketing do? Like it produces. Um, Product marketing has more clear KPIs in a PLG motion because it is literally on the product marketer to get people to use the product and then fork over their credit card. So that's a pretty easy, like, what do we want them to do? We have numbers around it, incentivize it. Yay. Everywhere else, I've seen people use production numbers. I've seen people use sales velocity. I mean, there's no such thing as a clean metric here. I mean, there's when you're in sales and marketing, it's all a partnership anyhow. So there's no real such thing as a clean metric, period. But it's like, okay, before this, our sales velocity was X. After it was Y. Um, can we prove that? Can we make it a KPI? It's really hard. I've been known to at first because, for example, we're not measuring sales velocity at first or something like that. Actually, I wouldn't even say it was a KPI per se. It's cheating a little bit, but it's a productivity or like what are your launch numbers or something that you can measure in a microcosm.
Hmm.
And that's a place you can start if you don't have other metrics in place that you can say this is then, this is now.
Gotcha. And
That's a hard
any,
question, George,
I
man.
know.
Come
Well,
on.
we are we're trying to figure this out as we go because
Mhm.
we want to help drive attribution or from the assets that product marketers
Right.
are setting up. And what we hear all the time is I have no idea. I have no idea what's like if
Yep.
salespeople are
Nope.
using the stuff that we're doing, and the old school kind of like PDFs, they fall into black holes.
Oh
We
yeah.
don't know, right? So like there, yeah, I mean, I should say that there are certain organizations that are sophisticated enough that they hack solutions together,
Right.
but that's certainly something that we hear all the
Oh
time.
yeah.
And
I used to go in as a
CMMs
product
crying.
marketer and wallpaper sales because they were always whining about like wanting a PDF, a one pager, da da da. So I'd give them so many one pagers, but they never got used ever. It was just something I did to shut up sales while I figured out how the heck to remessage the product.
I literally hear it every day, so that's
Mhm.
that rings a bell. Well, I had a question about branding activities, right? So one of the trends that I've seen over, well, certainly B2C has been doing this forever, but over the last couple of years, we've gotten very excited and active on things like LinkedIn with podcasts like this and things like that, which some could argue are like largely like branding exercises, and there's dark social and all that stuff,
Yeah.
which I know some organizations have done a great job of like tracking attribution around, but largely we do a lot of these things. We sort of intuitively feel that they're working, but then the board's like, hey, how the
Here
heck?
are your numbers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
what are your numbers? How is this really impacting revenue? What's your advice on that balance between, hey, we're going to build a brand and do these things that make us look innovative as well, and they do work, but we know are hard to track, versus
Hmm.
focusing on very specific,
Right.
let's say, demand gen activities that have
Hmm.
very clear
Right.
attribution.
And what's wild is brand makes everything else easier. Absolutely everything else easier. If you have a brand, you sell easier. You generate leads more easily. You keep customers more easily because you're a known brand. And yet then you're just like, well, but I don't have metrics around it. And my company's not big enough to look at share of voice, or to look at or to do a brand survey every 6 months. Plus doing a brand survey when you're a small company is like, nobody's ever heard of me, so whatever. So it really is difficult because most people know that brand matters. I mean, think about all the jingles we know. Think about B2C. Think about where you go to shop. And yet it is really hard to measure. And that's where you really, as a CMO, need to get your CEO behind you on that, and get the board convinced. Now, most investors know about brand. They've had to build their own VC brand. But it's I don't think there's an easy answer for that question for anybody.
Jenn, thank you so much for taking the time to bestow your wisdom. If folks want to learn more about, first of all, Sound GTM, what are the best channels to go to learn more? Also, if they want to follow you, I know you share wisdom all the time. I think I know what channel they should reach you, but what are the best
Yeah, well,
URLs?
so SoundGTM is literally soundgtm.com. The website is there, and I think it has the messaging okay. And follow me on LinkedIn. It's where I rant sometimes, and it's Jenn Steele, JennSteele. I'm not on Instagram as well, although it's mostly pictures of wine. And I'm not on X or Twitter, but I don't use that one anymore.
Awesome. Well, it's really awesome to see you. Thank you so much. Like always, I'm looking forward to checking out the product here soon, and have a wonderful day.
You too. Take care.